Welcome to the Leadership Buzz with Lloyd Buzz Buzzle. Buzz is an International Coaching Federation, ACC credentialed coach, DISC practitioner, and retired Air Force officer with 37 years of leadership experience. This podcast is for leaders who want to align behavior with values and grow in self-awareness. Each episode features one book, one idea, one story, and 3 coaching questions to reflect on your leadership. Work hard. Tell the truth. Here's Buzz. Let's roll.
Today we're talking about ownership, not just checking the box or doing the minimum, but people who take responsibility, care about the mission, and work hard because they know what they do matters. In leadership, ownership does not happen by accident. Leaders either create it or kill it by the way they communicate, delegate, and trust people. TJ, will you tell us about today's book?
This week's book is People Matter at Work by Josh Block. Josh argues that leadership is not just about results, confidence, or competence. It is about creating a culture where people feel safe, seen, and successful. In the book, he talks about moving from a me mindset to a we mindset, where leaders build trust, ownership, and generosity across the team. Today, we are focusing on ownership because people will work hard when they feel trusted, valued, and like what they do matters. Leaders play a huge role in creating that kind of culture through the way they communicate, delegate, and respond under pressure. Over to you, Coach Buzz.
Leadership improves when we slow down and think about the right things. One of those things is ownership. Not just taking responsibility when something goes wrong, but deciding that you're going to own your role, your attitude, your effort, and your impact on other people. The best leaders I've been around did not wait for someone else to fix the problem. They stepped up, they took initiative. They own what was theirs to own. But real leadership starts when we stop asking, whose fault is this, and start asking, what part of this is mine to own?
First, let's hear from Josh Block, the author of People Matter, a great book that I would recommend. Talk a little about ownership.
One of the biggest differences between a healthy and an unhealthy organization is the level of ownership that people carry. And while ownership is often relegated to and defined by those who are shareholders, the reality is that there's a grand difference between those who view their work as a job and it's a step in their career, and those who are part of an organization where they feel connected to the mission and they respect their leaders and they are stretched to become more than they ever dreamed of. And that manifests itself, not only is it transformational in their lives and they get to be part of something significant and help write a story, but it also boomerangs back to the company and the way that people stay, the way that people work together, the way that people serve customers, the way that people create and take risks. And so again, well, that's not the focus. The focus of creating healthy cultures is the way that it impacts people's lives. It does end up reciprocating back in a power of ownership that's really, really significant in shaping a company's culture and strategy and vision, and ultimately leading to some really remarkable outcomes.
We're going to talk about that idea from Josh's book, People Matter. It's really the difference between owning and renting, as he described it. I think this is one of the most practical leadership ideas there is, because it applies whether you are the CEO of a company, a frontline supervisor, a military officer, a coach, or someone just early in your career. A lot of people rent their roles, kind of like renting a car, right? And how you use it is how you show up and do what is required, and then wait to be told what to do. They blame the system, the boss, the organization, blame the circumstances or their peers. Renters say things like, this is not my job, nobody told me, this is somebody else's responsibility, I'm just doing what I was told. Owners sound a little different. They take that initiative, they step in, they care. Owners do not wait around for somebody else to solve the problem. They're constantly saying, what part of this is mine to own? What can I fix or what can I act on? The question really changes everything that is at the core. Because when you ask the question, you stop focusing on what everybody else is doing wrong and start focusing on what you can do differently. I saw this all the time in the military. The people who stood out were not always the smartest people in the room. They were not always the loudest. They were not always the highest ranking. Usually the people who stood out were the people who acted like owners. They saw a problem and stepped into it. They took that responsibility, they prepared, and they followed through. They made the team better because they cared about the mission. They cared about things. They would end up staying late, coming in early, checking on their teammates. And I remember this during my career because one of the things I always respected about aircraft maintainers was that they took their ownership personally. Many times they would literally put their name on the aircraft, on the side of the aircraft. Their name was attached to the work. The airplane, the jet, represented their standards, their attention to details, and their pride. If something wasn't right, they did not want their name connected to poor work, so they made sure that they fixed it. There was ownership. There was pride and accountability. I saw the same thing in our missile alert facilities and our ICBM force. We'd have our facility managers and all the other people that work there day to day who lived there, worked there, slept there, and pulled alert there, took pride. The best teams took ownership of that environment. They cleaned it up. They kept it clean. They went out and painted it. They took pride in it. They made sure standards stayed high, not because someone was coming to inspect it every day, but because it mattered. They acted like owners. That's one of the interesting things about ownership. We think that ownership sometimes makes us vulnerable. We think if we admit we missed something, we could have done better, people will lose respect for us. And usually just the opposite happens. People who trust leaders who are honest. People trust leaders who are accountable. People trust leaders who do not spend all of their energy protecting themselves. And when the ownership is not about carrying guilt, ownership is about carrying that responsibility, and that's just an important distinction. I saw that many times with young people in the military that would go far out of their way to make sure something got taken care of that was maybe just a small thing, but they knew that if they didn't take care of it, somebody else was going to have to take care of it behind them. That's a pretty important piece of how you approach work, right? Some people hear a message like this and think ownership means blaming yourself for everything. That is not what I'm talking about. Ownership does not mean you're responsible for every bad decision, every difficult person, or every unfair situation, or every broken system. Ownership means asking, given the situation I'm in, what is mine to own? Maybe it's really just your attitude. Maybe it's your preparation. It's your communication. Maybe it's the way you respond to under pressure, or it's just having a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. And then maybe it's just stepping up inside of something and stepping back. That really is ownership. And ownership matters because it's how culture is built in the organization. If the culture is not built through posters on the wall, it's built through slogans, and it's really built through daily behavior that people will react over and over again. When people blame, hide, avoid, and make excuses, that does become the culture. And when people step up, communicate, and solve problems and own their part, that becomes the culture too. And that really does show other people in the team where you're at. When one person sees another person taking responsibility and owning it, then they will too. The majority of the time, not every time, of course. I'm not that naive to think that just because somebody does something and it's witnessed that all will follow. We had folks that would walk across the base and they'd pick up garbage randomly because this was their base and they couldn't understand why anybody else wouldn't want to do it. It's their Air Force base and it's where they lived and they took pride in it. That's ownership. One of the things I worry about in today's leadership is that it becomes very easy for people to explain away their lack of ownership. We can always find somebody else to blame, and we can always point to those circumstances. So we can say, hey, we're too busy, we're too overwhelmed, too understaffed, or too unappreciated. And sometimes those things are true. But we have a very important thing in the military that we talk about is when you walk past something, you really become part of the problem too, right? So if there's literally garbage laying on the ground and you fail to pick it up or help out with it, that's kind of making you part of that problem. And sometimes those circumstances are difficult. It's not just about stopping and picking up garbage, but I've had to turn around and step back myself when I see something like that and think, oh, I need to just go take care of that. And sometimes leaders are overwhelmed. Sometimes people are overwhelmed. And organizations could be broken. And in those situations, ownership matters even more because ownership is one of the few things fully within our control. That ownership, that attitude, and it controls how you show up. And the effort is the number one thing. Effort and attitude. If there's any one thing that any worker, anybody from CEO, or from the squadron commander all the way down to the lower echelon of folks in the organization, and you can control your effort and attitude every single day. You control whether you're the kind of person who creates energy or drains it from others. That's something we're going to talk about in a future episode with the multipliers from another book that we're working on right now. You control whether people can trust you. That is why ownership is such an important leadership quality. Leaders who act like owners create more owners. Leaders who act like renters create more renters. If you constantly blame, your team will blame also. And then whatever you reward, whether that's avoiding responsibility, your team will also avoid responsibility. If you step up, your team is more likely to step up too. People are watching. You may not think so. You may do something and thought, well, nobody saw me do that or not do it. They watch how leaders respond when things go wrong. And let's face it, a person that influences another person is a leader. It's just how you choose to be a leader. Because they watch how leaders handle these mistakes, and they watch whether leaders point fingers or look in the mirror. And that is where real leadership credibility comes from. Not from being perfect, but from and not always having that right answer. Credibility comes through consistency, and it comes through ownership. One of the phrases I come back to a lot is this: if you can win the mission, you can win the mission and still lose the team. I have seen leaders who got results but left people exhausted, discouraged, and disconnected because they never really created ownership in others. They make every decision, controlled every detail, but then they never let people think for themselves, so they didn't create that ownership. That is not ownership. That's dependence and waiting for people to ask you what's going on. Strong leaders create ownership in the people around them. They trust those people, and that's really what it comes down to, right? As Josh was talking in his book about the me cycle and we cycle, they trust people, they let people take responsibility, and they really allow people to grow. Because when people feel ownership, they care more, they do more, they invest more. They take more pride in that outcome. That's true in business, sports, families, leadership. So here's your challenge. Where in your life are you renting instead of owning? You know, when you rent a rental car, you tend not maybe to treat it as well as you would treat your car at home. Maybe it's at work. Maybe it's your relationships. But I always thought at work when I was in the Air Force, like, how would I do this at home? How would I treat this? And how would I be a good steward of it? Would I fix this or not fix this? Would I buy something new? I always just think, how would I do if I was at home? I mean, maybe it's in even your health and work balance. Maybe it's your attitude. Maybe it's something you know you need to address, but just keep putting it off. Ask yourself, what part of this is mine to own? The question can change your leadership. That question can charge your team. That question can charge your whole life up. One final thought. People do matter. And when people feel ownership, they care more, they grow more, and they become more invested in the mission. Ownership is not about being perfect. It's about stepping up and asking, what part of this is mine to own? Because that question changes everything.
Let's get to this week's 3 coaching questions for our listeners.
For this week's coaching questions, describe a situation where someone on your team took real ownership without being asked. What did you do as the leader that may have helped create that? 2, tell me about a place in your team where people may be acting more like renters than owners. What are you seeing, hearing, or feeling that tells you that? And then finally, where might you be holding on too tightly and staying too involved or not giving people enough room to carry part of that load? What would trusting them more look like? Describe that.
Josh Block reminds us that people work hard and take more ownership when they feel trusted, valued, and like they matter. Ownership is not something leaders can demand. It is something leaders create through trust, communication, and consistency. In People Matter at Work, Josh makes the point that when leaders move from me to we, people stop acting like employees and start acting like owners. They work hard, tell the truth, care about the mission, and take pride in doing things the right way. Josh makes a strong case that ownership is built by leaders who create trust, clarity, and a sense that people matter. Take us home, Buzz.
Before we wrap up today, I want to thank Josh Block for sharing his thoughts and insights for this episode. I also want to encourage you to pick up a copy of his book, People Matter. It is a great reminder that leadership is always about people, relationships, trust, and the way we show up for others. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with someone else who cares about leadership. You can follow me on LinkedIn or visit workhardtellthetruth.com for more leadership content and updates. Until next time, keep leading, keep serving, work hard, and tell the truth.